Everyone knows that there are a ton of Linux distros out there. Whether you've used Linux or not, if you know anything about Linux at all, probably the number one thing you do know is that there are a ton of distros. And making the choice of which distro is best for you is damn near impossible. Now, in the past, when I was asked this question or I made a video about this question, I would tell you to use everything. And that's still the overarching advice that I have to give, because there's no way you can know until you try. That's the way that it works. You don't know if Ubuntu is the best for you unless you try Ubuntu. You don't know OpenSUSE is the best for you until you try OpenSUSE. And you can't really compare and contrast distros without using several. Now, there are those of you who watch this channel who proclaim to have never distro hopped in your life. I don't really believe you, but let's say you're telling the truth. You are a rare and special snowflake. The vast majority of people don't find their forever loved distro on their first try. That's just not the way that it works. Instead, they usually install one, find out something that doesn't really suit them, then they move on to another one. And that process may go on for a little while until they either do one of three things. They'll move back to Windows because they couldn't find the distro that they wanted. They find the distro that they want, or they get addicted to distro hopping and just kind of move around forever and ever. Those are really the three options when it comes to distro hoppers. But that's usually how it goes. You find one, it doesn't work, you move on to another. But you still have to answer your question, where do you start? What distros can you choose? How do you really truly figure out which one's the best for you? And has the answers to this question actually changed over the course of the last few years? So today, I'm going to take you through some of the questions that you have to ask yourself when you're choosing a distro. And some of those questions are fairly obvious, some of them not. But let's go ahead and jump in. But before we jump in, leave a thumbs up on this video. I'd really appreciate it. It'd really help the channel. So the first question on the list is actually the most important one, I think. Why do you want to use Linux? What's the purpose? Why did you choose to make the jump from whatever came before to Linux? The answer to this question is going to help you figure out what distro type that you want to use, but also it'll kind of give you a sense of what kind of person you are. Now, we're not talking about, really deep stuff here, like are you a good person, are you going to hell, or any of that stuff. None of that stuff. Instead, what I'm really talking about here is it's going to help you try to figure out what kind of computer user you are. Are you a tinker? Are you someone who really wants stability? Are you someone who wants to do cool and amazing things, or are you just going to spend all day in a web browser? Why are you using Linux, and what you going to do when you get here? Those are the questions that you have to ask yourself, and those are really the two most important ones. Why and what you're going to do. If you can answer those two questions, it's going to be fairly easy to figure out what distro you want, because you can just look at what distros provide what you're looking for and what suits you best, and you're going to be good to go. But if you don't know the answers, you're going to be much more prone to distro hopping. So those are the first two really big ones. The next one is, what sort of hardware do you have? Now, do you have a 10-year-old computer, maybe a ThinkPad, maybe you're a ThinkPad person, or maybe you have an old server that you're doing, or maybe you have the top of the line 4090 with a whole bunch of frills and stuff like that in your system, and you need that to work. Well, that's going to help you determine what distro you're going to use, because you can't use something that doesn't have the most recent kernel if you have the most brand new hardware. The more recent the kernel you have, the more hardware it's going to support, including those brand new pieces of hardware that you've put into your computer. Now, if you use an older hardware, your choices are much more open. You can use anything from a rolling release that has all the latest software and drivers and stuff, which you don't really need, or you can use something that focuses on older hardware, something like MX Linux or Puppy Linux or something like that, something that's meant for older pieces of hardware. Now, there are distros out there, obviously, that are more suited for older pieces of hardware that focus on things like 32-bit still. You can go find something like that if you need to. What hardware you use is, and this is my point, really does determine what type of distro you're going to want to use in the end, because you're going to need your hardware to work, obviously. So that's another question you have to answer. The next question is actually also quite important. What is more important to you? Stability or brand new software? Now, most people I feel, are going to answer stability, because you want your computer to work. I think that that's an obvious thing, right? You want to be able to boot up your laptop in the morning and do whatever it is you need to do. If you're here, you're going to do some work, you need it to work. You can't spend your time tinkering. And one of the knocks against Linux is always that you have to spend your time tinkering. There's always so much stuff that you have to do and learn in order to figure out and get it to work, right? That's the big knock against Linux, is that it can be hard. It has stuff that you need to do. And that oftentimes means that your system isn't as stable as you want. But that doesn't mean that that's always true. There are distros out there that once you have them set up, they are stable. They don't pollute your system with brand new features. They don't bring you in a whole bunch of hardware configuration and drivers and stuff that you don't need. They are just as stable as possible, and that's the way that they are meant to be. That's the way that they're marketed and all that stuff, right? So if that's the sort of situation you want to find yourself in, that's probably where you want to go. If you have more recent hardware and you need something like a rolling release, then that's what you're going to do there. Or perhaps you're one of those people who just always needs the most recent version of whatever, whether it's GIMP or a browser or Audacity or OBS or AutoCAD type solutions, whatever it is. Maybe you need the most recent version of something. You can then choose a distro that will offer that to you. Now, there's one caveat here that's going to help you out. Let's say you want stability, but you also need more recent versions of some hardware or some software, excuse me. Well, when it comes to that, you can use something like Debian or Ubuntu or Linux Mint that's more stable, and then add in something that comes from snaps or Flatpaks in order to get your more recent versions of that software. So, for example, if you want the most recent version of OBS, you can install the Flatpak version of OBS on any distro, and it will get you that most recent version without having to worry about going through and using a rolling release distro. So packaged containerized applications basically solve the problem of having more recent versions of software and being able to use a distro that's considered more stable. So that's something to keep in mind. The next one I feel is also very important. How much do you want to learn? And this here is the kind of the crux of the whole Linux experiment thing. If you don't want to learn anything, you're not going to be very happy with Linux. But there are levels, because no matter what, you're going to have to learn some new things. If you've never been here before, you're going to learn some new things. But there's a difference in the amount you have to learn between Linux Mint and Linux from scratch. The gulf there is wide, right? You can choose your level of difficulty, basically what I'm saying. If you're in a game, you can choose your level of difficulty. Linux is kind of the same. Linux Mint, very easy to install, very easy to use. It doesn't mean that you don't have to learn how to do something similar to how you would in a game. You have to learn the controls of the game or whatever. But if you set your difficulty level to hard and go to Gen 2 or Arch or Linux from scratch or whatever you choose that's a little bit more difficult, then obviously you're going to have to learn and put up with a lot more. No one's recommending you do that as a brand new Linux user, but if you're doing your research and you find yourself interested in something that's a little bit more fiddly when it comes to installation or maintenance, think something like Arch or Gen 2, what have you, you can go into those things. There's nothing saying a new user can't go install Gen 2. I know several brand new to Linux users who have done so. But you're going to have to be prepared to learn more than if you were just going to go use Linux Mint. So keep that in mind as you're making your choice. And the last one on the list is kind of similar to that, is that's how patient are you? Because you are going to come to a situation, no matter what distro you choose, where you're going to have to fix something. And if you are less patient, you should use a distro that is more suited towards stability and no change. Once you have it set up, it basically stays the same and it's going to work. If you have more patience and you're more willing to tinker, then something like Arch or OpenSUSE or something like that along those lines will help you learn more, but it'll also require patience for when things go wrong, because you're going to get frustrated. You're going to have to actually fix something somewhere along the line, and that's going to have to require you to go do research, learn something, as we talked about in the last one, and also be patient while you are waiting for responses from other people if you need help, all those types of things. And the more complicated a Linux distro is, the more patience you're probably going to have. So just keep that in mind as you go through, and you'll probably be better off. If you find yourself with no patience at all, find yourself a Linux distro that's going to have as little change and little complication as possible. So the last question we have to answer today is, what distro do you choose? And this is where we get into the whole nonsense answer, because I can't answer that question for you. You have to answer these questions that I've talked about today and kind of figure out where you need to go on your own. So, for example, let's just give you a few examples that you could choose from based on the questions that we asked. So, if you are going to be using Linux to do actual work outside of a browser, but you need more recent hardware support, you need more recent software support, and you're not afraid to learn and tinker, and you have quite a bit of patience, Arch Linux is an option for you, right? That would suit you probably pretty well. Is it going to be easy? No, but you said you were willing to learn, you said you had patience, and you said you needed these extra, more recent features. Arch is a good option for you. Let's just say, for example, then, what about instead for those of you who want a more stable experience? You don't have as much patience. You don't have the interest in learning everything that comes with setting up Arch or Gentoo or whatever. Well, something like Ubuntu or Linux Mint is going to be better for you because it's going to be more stable. It's going to be kind of set up and forget. You can just kind of set up your system, and it'll just work as long as it works. You don't have to worry about any of the fiddly bits that sometimes creeps their way into Linux. Then, of course, there are the more middle grounds, people who want stability but aren't afraid to tinker. Maybe something like Debian would be good for you, right? So the whole point of this exercise isn't for me to answer the question, what's the best Linux distro for beginners, or what distro should you use? Specifically you, I'm looking at you there. I can't answer that question. The best solution, as I said at the beginning, is to try as many as possible, but you can have informed decisions based on the questions we asked today. You answer those questions and you'll have at least some idea of what kind of distro you want. Rolling release versus more static release, more recent software, less recent software, things like that. Those things all play into what choice you make and what distro you choose. So, any thoughts on this, you can leave those in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you if you have questions or comments or whatever. Comment section, love to hear from you. You can follow me on Mastodon. That link will be in the video description. You can support me on Patreon at patreon.com/linuxcast. Thanks to everybody who does support me on Patreon and YouTube. You guys are all absolutely amazing. Without you, the channel just would not be anywhere near where it is right now. So thank you so very, very much for your support. I truly, honestly do appreciate it. If you too would like to support me on Patreon, patreon.com/linuxcast, or there's links for Ko-fi and YouTube in the video description. You can also support me by going over to the shop, which is available at shop.thelinuxcast.org. There you'll find all sorts of awesome merchandise, all the proceeds for which go directly towards helping me make more Linux content for you guys. So thank you so very much for those of you who have done that. Thanks everybody for watching. I'll see you next time.